Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Questioning a better way, one gracefully disruptive conversation at a time.
Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila. I'm very excited to be with you here today. We've got an incredible conversation coming up. You're going to love this one, especially if you're here for my health and wellness graceful disruptors. But before we jump in, I want to give a special thank you to our sponsors, Lux Neuro, offering neurofeedback and counseling where your heart and mind align. For more information about what neurofeedback can do for you, listen to the neurofeedback stories of transformation in the middle of this podcast. Neurofeedback effectively treats everything from insomnia, anxiety, depression, trauma, ADHD, and much more. Go optimize your brain today. Special thank you to Declan James Watches. They are local and veteran owned out here in Colorado, and 10% goes back to the Navy SEAL Foundation. And last but not least, our very own Colorado Clownfish Swim School, swim lessons and water safety training for all ages. We believe in life skills through sports. Come waterproof your family today. That is all of our friends and family and big supporters. So we got to give them some love. But without further ado, we've got Cortney McDermott. Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
it's
excited to be
it's Friday. Yeah, it's Friday afternoon. Full transparency. It took us a minute to get here, so this is a very anticipated convo. I don't always read the bio, but I'm going to read Cortney's because she's such a rock star, and I want to make sure we highlight the full situation that she has going on. Cortney McDermott is a best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and human potential enthusiast. With a Master of Science from the London School of Economics. Her work in the field of self-development and business strategy has been featured in Inc., Women's Health, Success, the Huffington Post, Fox News, and many other mainstream business and lifestyle media. Cortney's career highlights include her time as an executive at Vanity Fair Corporation, vice president at Sustainability Partners, Inc., and then running her own business with clients and audiences at Universal Music Group, Google, Nike, and Virgin Unite. Cortney speaks 4 languages and lives between Italy and U.S. Holy cow, Cortney.
Yikes. Sounds like a lot.
No. I feel like you need to be like 95 or something.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yes, everybody in this moment should be thinking #goals. But before we unpack all that awesomeness, I always like to unpack the human behind the mission first. So I like to know about your young self. I think, our journey and future is usually written in the stars very early, but tell me about young Cortney.
Oh, I love that you asked this question. So few people do. And it's sort of like they want to start already where you are. Young Cortney. Wow. I grew up in a family of 5 kids born in 6.5 years. So pretty tight, pretty military style, I guess, in some ways. And definitely I was the second to last in that. And there was a lot of craziness in my household, like in every way. So there were some good things, and then there were some not so great things. And so from a very young age, I actually wanted help. Like I was really, the existential crisis was real for me very early on. And I just remember, from the time that I know of that I could read and I could go to books, I was always really into human potential. I just wanted to know, what are we? What are we doing here? How can it be better? And how can we sort of like overcome some of these things? So young Cortney was always really into that. And I know when my mom used to introduce us, again, 5 kids, she would point to all of them, say, give their natural age. And then she'd point to me and be like, she's 6 going on 60. So the whole 95 thing at the beginning is a little bit accurate in terms of my desire to really just kind of know more and be more and express more. So
that's wild. It's so funny. Again, it's usually there. It takes us, those about 20 to 40 years in between after your 0-year-old to figure out what we knew at 0. So it's that unpacking that's the real cardio. Were either of your parents kind of old souls, or where did you get this like questioning larger order, larger ways, or all those deeper things?
I don't believe so. My parents, so there was a lot of, like I said, craziness. There's a lot of mental and physical trauma actually when I was growing up. So I think my desire to kind of do what I do in the world stemmed a lot from that. And it's really interesting what you do with what you're given, right? But my journey, or the way the formalist wanted to express through this form, was like figure it out and help as many people as you can along the way, including yourself. So that was, I guess I was like, why are we suffering uselessly? I was a little Buddha. Yeah.
I love that. Well, it's pretty interesting. There's something that fascinates me. I don't have kids, but I'm one of four. I'm the oldest, and I have three younger brothers. So I hear you on the craziness and all the energy. I always felt for some reason very pulled, and like I've coached my entire life, coached for 10 years at, varsity high school lacrosse, etc. And I was always fascinated by how kids from the same family took different paths. And I had always questioned what motivates us to seek an answer or seek help, or you go seek numbing out or drinking or whatnot. Like the path can go two different ways. And I've spent my own time in research and conversations, and I don't know that I had figured out, but from my own perspective, and I'm curious to hear your answer, I always felt something kind of pulling me through. I always had a mission and a purpose and something that I felt like I needed to do. And I don't know if it was spiritual or my own idiosyncrasies or anxiety or what, but I always felt pulled. What was your experience, do you think, that pulled you through, that sought this, I'm going to figure this out versus go numb out?
Yeah, very similar for me. And I did also numb out on several occasions. So, been there too, experienced that. I just didn't get the same results, and I didn't get the same level of like, it wasn't sustainable. So what I was noticing anytime I try, and we numb out in different ways. Some of them are very socially acceptable. Like we can numb out with work. I did that for a really long time and achieved a lot. We can numb out in academia. I did that too. We can numb out in sports like you did, or I mean, I'm not saying that you did that, but I know I went through a whole marathon phase where I was like, I need to do marathons all the time. And I was like Forrest Gump. And then one day I just was like, it's time to stop running. But I was constantly seeking that connection with that intelligence within me. And for me, it just very much to your point, very, very similar in that it was a burning desire, as it's often described. Like some of us, I think probably all of us have it, but it can get really buried. And the more you start to say, no, I'm committed to that, I'm devoted to that, and see the way that it starts to manifest in your life and change and really inform, like the formless, the way it wants to inform your form, the more you experiment with that, the more you kind of want to. But I definitely as well had very much a burning desire, and come hell or high water, it was like, I got to figure this out. The whole feeling good in this human suit. Sometimes I have a friend who calls it a human suit, feeling good in it and like loving it all, and kind of just really understanding what that looked like for me. But yeah, it was very much a come hell or high water, got to do it. Yeah.
It's like I said, it's fascinating because I've had so many conversations that I know you have had too. And there's no real common denominator through line. I don't know if it's nurture, if it's nature or what, but I'm always curious on what makes our young people take choice, mostly because to people like us on the mic or sharing the voice, we can help inspire our young people. But I also believe, and I'm sure you're in alignment on this, that we all have our own journeys, and things kind of happen when they need to for the right reasons. And some of that's hard to chalk up when it's hard stuff. But I also think that our best leaders are the ones that have gone through it authentically, and then they can relate and empathize with some of the toughest cases, and that, those really hard things can lead to a beautiful path when you can connect with someone that's been there similarly. Does that relate to you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I even wrote about that some in the second book, because I felt like it was so important for people to, you get to that point of wanting to give up, right? We can all get to that point multiple times in our life. And it's so important to see those examples of what it looks like when you don't, what it looks like when you go over that line and you transcend something, which is an inner boundary, which is an inner confinement even, and what can happen. But seeing those examples, it's a little bit like Roger Bannister in the 4-minute mile, right? I mean, before he broke that record, it was impossible. But then, as the years progressed, and even I believe that same year, if not the year following, so many, there were other athletes that broke it. And that's the way we also kind of, just to open up to those potentials, oftentimes we have to be able to see it and relate to it on some level. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that can lean into like athletics, representation. I mean, all kinds of stuff where I'm always very appreciative of anyone that's gone through anything in any capacity shares that, because, everyone has gone through something similar, and connecting those dots can literally save lives. Have you ever had any incredible stories or people come up to you and saying like, I read this book or one of your many books and said, this really changed me, or any of that immediate feedback?
Absolutely. We get it all the time. Actually, we get a lot of testimonials. We got one the other day that just blew me away. This guy was living in a he was living in an RV with his, I think it was 4 children, or I mean, literally in a kind of real dire straits in the way they were living. And he was talking about their situation. And then he said, and I read the book and we're out of it. And everything has changed. Everything has shifted. And he was telling me the story. I mean, well, through his word, through his writing into us. And I'm reading it and thinking, whoa, I mean, this person was ready for the information. It's not the book per se. It's what is the information you're calling into you that is you're ripe for in that moment. And when you feel that kind of resonance, it enlivens something in you. It turns on something. And that's what we have to kind of pay attention to, because anyone who's not pointing the way back to you is missing the mark. And I think any valid work is saying, like, you have the ruby slippers. It's time to click them.
Amen. I can't go here with everyone, but we got to dive into this. I always say, like, God, universe, Madonna, whether you're, traditionally spiritual, you believe in energy, or I'm a big Madonna fan. I just hear for the music and the vibration. Tell me about, like, your spiritual energy, like where you tap in, like how this connects to you, like your version of.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's everything, really. And I tend to, when I'm having conversations like this, I'll tend to refer to it as an intelligence, right?
Okay.
And it's the same. I mean, I refer to it in many different ways, also God, spirit, all the ways. I'm very comfortable with all of that terminology, but I oftentimes will refer to it as intelligence for people to kind of start to understand their innate, inherent connection with it. Because the intelligence I'm talking about, that we may call God or source or however we want to call it, it's the same intelligence that is conducting the trillions of biochemical reactions occurring in your body every second. Okay. It's the same intelligence that's sending electrical impulses down to your legs to have them take one step after another. It's the same intelligence that's governing the path of the planets. It's that intelligence that I'm talking about. And we lean into that intelligence. We have almost complete faith in that intelligence. We have to for our survival. So 99.999999, I don't know how far that number goes on, % of the time, we're completely trusting in it. I mean, we don't go to bed at night and say, oh my God, is the sun going to come up in the morning? Is it not going to come up? Is it going to come up? We don't, unless we have some serious psychoses, we don't do that. Right. And so, but we do this with this infinitesimal part that's left over, this 0.00000 whatever 1% that's left over. We say, not that. Like, I can't trust that. If it doesn't go this way, then I'm not okay, whether it's a relationship, a job, whatever that looks like. And so for me, my biggest, I say aspiration, if you can call it that, but like leaning into that intelligence, relying on it, trusting in it, cultivating that full faith for that tiny, tiny, tiny % that was left over that I thought I somehow needed to control, which is absurd. But really kind of banishing that absurdity from my psyche and knowing that the only way to enjoy this experience is to trust fully that everything that's happening is happening for my perfect evolution. And so my connection with that intelligence comes in many, many ways. Could be in dancing, could be in meditation, could be in talking to you. I mean, it's like, that's the thing that I want driving everything. That's what I want to drive the ego, for example. People are always bashing the ego. I love my ego. My ego is amazing. It's just a character, right? It's just a character that was created as a way for the formless to express through this form. So it's really, that is like saying, but it is coming, that the direction and the drive of that character is through and as that intelligence we're talking about. So for me, connection with it is of paramount importance. It's the thing I am devoted to. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, all of my conversations and just Curious Human, I've never heard it referred to the intelligence. I love that. I think that, I mean, honestly, I'm a very visual human, so I immediately think of the Matrix, just because I don't know why. But I love how, and that also kind of releases like any sort of religious connotation, or even because spirit energy, people are like woo, and I'm like, well, physics is energy, so it's not too woo, it's still like it's science. Anyways, yeah. I really like the way that refers, and I'm with you. I'm fascinated by that 0.01%. How do we gracefully disrupt that mistrust? And what do you think? Do you think that's nurture, nature, a combination of things? Like, where does that mistrust or that lack of belief stem from?
Well, there's a lot of conditioning around it. I think Anthony DeMello kind of pointed out really well in his work. He was sort of studying the Buddha and the way the Buddha was talking about the Four Noble Truths and how we're all stuck in this suffering, right? And how to liberate ourselves from that. And he talked about it being our suffering being a result of the desires we have. Now, I believe that a desire is an evolutionary impulse that's coursing through you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the desire per se. And the way that Anthony DeMello kind of just deconstructed those teachings in his work was it's the attachment to the desire. In other words, it's without this thing, I can't be happy. And so the disruption to your question occurs at the level of saying, hey, what if I could actually just be happy anyway? Like, what if I just decide to conjure up those emotions of joy regardless of what's happening? And it does take some practice because, to your other question of nature, nurture, et cetera, it takes some practice because we've been hyper conditioned to believe that things have to go a certain way for us to be okay. And so when we attach to that, and then when we actually start to believe we are that, it's a little bit like, I don't know who to attribute this to, but somebody was talking about this guy playing Macbeth in New York on stage on Broadway, and then doing it for so long that thinking he was Macbeth, right? And so starts to go around New York and he's behaving like Macbeth. And you would say that's absurd, right? If you saw somebody like that, but that's what we do. We walk around with these masks. We say, I'm this thing, and you better make sure that you recognize me as this thing. Otherwise, my whole world's going to crumble. And I have to make sure that I stay this way. And when I talk about that, I talk about it as the calcification of the persona, right? We use the word person when we say I'm this kind of person or that kind of person. And that word, it derives from persona, which in ancient Greek mythology were the masks they wore. Okay. So we go around and we're like, make sure you've got, like, this is it. You got to make sure that you've got this thing dialed. And again, we start to calcify into that. I will sometimes show pictures. I usually don't do any slides or things when I give presentations around the world, but I started a couple of years ago to show this picture of myself from 10 years ago. And the vast majority of the audience cannot recognize me at all as the same human.
What do you look like?
And
what's the difference?
It's just like, I just look completely different. And most people be like, wow, there's been a massive improvement. That's how I think people, when people see the pictures, they're like, holy smokes, like, what did you do? And I haven't had any work done on myself ever. So I'm like, what you're seeing is consciousness and the way it's moving through my form in any given moment, which can change in any given moment, depending on my level of tiredness, depending on my level of capacity for whatever it is that I'm affronting in that moment. But the thing is, if I'm tapped in and tuned in and turned on and with that intelligence that we're talking about, then the way it starts to express through the form is just constantly evolving and changing and sort of sprouting into also what needs to be seen in that moment. And that can sound like science fiction. I actually opened this last book with that of, I wouldn't have believed the changes in me if I didn't also have people around me who noticed that, who were like blown away, because I would have been like, well, that didn't really happen. Or maybe that was a product of my imagination or something else. And I have had such profound experiences that have just come from connecting with this consciousness and giving the person or the persona or the character over to it to say, look, you lead me, you show me the way. Versus what it was before, which was very performance oriented. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's where my mind took me.
you follow your heart or your mind, either one. I love all of that. And you hit on a lot of things, and especially being an athlete, your identity being disrupted or your persona, attachment. I work on that to this day, because as an athlete or business entrepreneur, it's like, well, if I make it to the CrossFit Games or I make it to D1, or it's like, well, if I don't do that, am I going to die? Absolutely. Like, there is no gray area. So, I'm so hard conditioned to have that thinking. I'm not as much of like a dollar chaser as I'm very like sacred with my time. But even that, it's been this constant process of letting go of or being unattached from the outcome. And that's a consistent practice. But I think what you really talked about with the persona and the identity, I think that's something that we go through multiple times in our life, of shifting from an athlete, maybe to a mom, to a college graduate or whatever. And letting go of that identity is like where a lot of, I think, our really big mental health crisis exists. And we don't talk about this kind of stuff more. Like, you can clearly go into the minutia of all the things, but even just like our very surface level conversations of like, you're many things. You are turmeric and tequila. You don't have to be just an athlete. You can be an athlete and a mom and an author and a scholar and live in 2 different countries and speak 4 languages and do all this stuff. And just like disrupting our own mindset. I'm very curious, what are your like daily practices or daily techniques where you keep this practice alive and keep yourself sharp at these things?
Yeah, one, also, I kind of want to go back to this notion because maybe it wasn't also adequately addressed, which is it's scary. It gets really, really scary. You have to be willing to die
Mhm.
to the persona you've created. That's some
Yeah.
really scary stuff. It's like okay to feel frightened. It's okay to be like, whoa, who would I be without this identity? And really starting to play around it and open up to new potentials, because it's really just like this sea of infinite potentials once you start to open up to it. And it's almost like once you get this, it's like it is very much like having the mask that you can change in the theater. At first it's very disruptive, and it feels disruptive to you, and it feels disruptive to everyone else who's especially but they're not recognizing that they're not the mask, right? So it's like, put your mask back on. Someone's like, put your costume back on. I'm freaking out here. Why are you changing? But we are designed to change, and when we don't allow ourselves to change is when we actually will experience a lot of disruption in our psyche. So coming back to what you just asked of like practices and things, there are many, many things that I do, but I dedicate myself mostly to this expansion. So a lot of times people be like, I don't know how you get all that done, but I have done a total like time reversal thing. I really leverage the things in me that move so Archimedes is cited as saying, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to put it, and I shall move the world.
Okay.
It's like finding those leverage points, right? Like, what are those leverage points? And I know for me, I dance so much in that space of like potential and play. And how am I going to open up to new potentials if I'm constantly doing the same? So I'm constantly doing it. I switch it up all the time. So I'm not like, when they tell you in so-called performance culture, like you got to do this thing first thing in the morning, you're going to make sure you do 12 reps and 20. I don't even know. I can't even go there because I don't know. But I'm always like, for me, that sort of misses the mark because it will be different for everyone. But what I have noticed is there are some staples, and really it's about connecting to that intelligence that I've been talking about and finding ways that are unique to you, but also that feel good to you, and kind of going at it slowly, especially at first, because otherwise it's too disruptive for the system. Really every single day, the beginning of my day is devoted to some sort of practice in connecting with that intelligence. So that can look a little different every day, but it could be me moving and connecting with it. It could be me sitting still and connecting with it. It could be me using different technologies like mantras, or it can manifest in various different ways. But my priority remains my connection with that intelligence above all else.
Mm-hmm.
Which for some people is like, what do you mean above all else? Like beloved, blah, 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 above your family, above your friend, like whatever. I'm like, yeah, actually it is, because I can't give my fullest self if I'm not connected to that intelligence, and that intelligence is not what's guiding me. Otherwise, if I connect with anyone from a place of wanting to be a certain way, or not being connected to that source, light, energy, however you want to describe it, all of those are just metaphors anyway, but really being kind of in the groove of that, then I'm not going to be very much benefit to you or anyone else. And so that is my devotional practice, is like the beginning of my day. There is nothing else that supersedes that. It doesn't even matter. Even if I have to leave at 4 a.m. to catch a flight, I'm waking up in enough time so that I make space for that before I go. And even on the way there, it's like that, whatever, if I'm getting driven to the airport or something, it's like that time. If I haven't had enough time, I'm like, that's my connection time. I'm just like tuned out and tuning in to what is begging, what is calling to be expressed through me.
So when you wake up, do you hold space, you hold that time, and then do you just see what kind of comes in, and then you let the practice kind of guide itself?
Yeah, so it depends. I have different seasons, but I will normally kind of focus on a teaching. A lot of those teachings I share in the books too. Like I'll focus on one teaching because I'll want that teaching to kind of really, really penetrate into my deep awareness. And those times, like people don't realize, those are your prime real estate times. I mean, this as an athlete, this as a person who's been able to do all the amazing things you've been able to do in the world. It's like your prime real estate of your being is like the morning and the night, right? And the reason for that is because of what's happening in terms of brainwave frequencies. and not just brainwave frequencies. We could go into also the heart and like what's happening. You have different body minds. So when we say mind, there's many different active minds. You have your heart has its own set of neural circuitry, as does your gut. The electromagnetic field around your heart is hundreds, if not thousands of times more greater than your cerebral mind. So it's just, there's so much happening. But the way I like to use that time of when I'm going in and out of those frequencies is just really consciously, like I'm directing my attention very, very consciously to a teaching, to a learning, to an understanding that I want to actually take over my awareness. I want to flood my awareness with that. And so I'll use those times. Like I could wake up, like, for example, this morning I woke up and I did it with exercises. I had some things, some messages that were just coming through, and I just repeated them to myself. And I did these exercises, but it could be that I go straight to my meditation cushion. It could be that I go for a walk and do it. I'm just like playing with the ways in which I engage with this consciousness, but I'm always engaging with the consciousness in some form. And I think it's really important, again, to kind of find what really resonates with you and kind of what works. Like for some people, it could be mowing the lawn. I've had people tell me this. I've been in interviews where, the host has told me like, that happens for me when I'm mowing the lawn or shaving my face. And I'm like, yes, use that time. And the thing is, when he's doing that, he's repeating, don't cut the grass too short. Don't cut the grass too short. Don't cut the grass too short. Do you realize the hypnotic power that you possess? And also when you leave beta, for example, in terms of brainwave frequencies, and you start to dip into alpha, and then maybe if you could be eyes wide open, it's happened to me before, in theta, delta, your eyes wide open, you are meditating. I mean, I'm meditating. We're meditating right now. It's just grooving with what's in front of you. That's what's happening, So, yeah.
I love it. Well, there's a lot to unpack right there. And have you ever done neurofeedback?
No.
Brain training? I'll send you some information. That's our title sponsor. It's a longtime friend, and I'm a massive advocate for on many levels, but it's way into like the brain health minutia. Anywho, definitely worth checking out because you can even intentionally drop into specific zones. But what I want to talk about is this delicate balance between discipline of like the practice and also surrendering, like letting go enough for like things to come in. And that's the juxtaposition of seemingly opposing things can harmoniously coexist. TNT at the core of its soul. You have to have both. And surrendering has been a very hard thing for me. My narrative is, I've got to do it. I've got to do everything. It's no one can, no one's going to take care of it if I don't get blah, blah, blah. And I think a lot of our mission driven men and women, but a lot of our women, especially our moms, the ones doing everything, have that narrative. How was it, or do you have good practices, but how was it for you getting to that mindset of surrender and trust and any other which way you want to label it?
Yeah. Well, first, I think to your point, the efforting is really important. The efforting, and really what's happening in your efforting is that you're learning how to focus your attention and your intention, and you're just learning how to start to minimize the probability outcomes available to you in any given moment. And so there's a lot of power in that. But what you'll see with most people is through that efforting process, they're in frequencies that don't invite the corresponding match in, because it's a little bit of that struggling energy, and that struggling energy just corresponds to frequencies that make it a lot harder to draw that probability outcome back to you, right? And so, but I like the efforting because what I love about it is you get to this point of exhaustion. And I often have had this happen in my life. It's been such a beautiful thing, is like I try. I'm efforting. And then it's the moment that I give up. And actually alongside of that, I get goofy. So I'm just like, screw it. I'm just not going to get there. And then boom, it happens. And if you study our greatest discoveries in history, you'll see the same sort of mechanism at play. So when you look at things like, I don't know, the discovery of DNA or a lot of Einstein's findings, they didn't come in the moment of efforting. They came in the moment of relaxation. And so what I started to do a while back was sort of reverse engineer that, in the sense that I started to build in a lot more relaxation into my life. And I started to put a lot more emphasis on that because I knew what was happening. I knew what was happening with my brainwave frequencies. I knew what was happening with the way my body, right? So your body too, we're holding so much stuck, stagnant energy in our body. And if we can't release that, we can't open up to a new potential. It's really, really hard to do so. So I started practicing with relaxation, but I also started practicing with very specific ways of moving to liberate that energy, to liberate the stuck energy within me. And so there are two things that I'll often cite that are sort of miracles. One is yawning.
Okay.
Yawning is considered the best kept secret of neuroscience. It's energizing and relaxing at the same time. It releases a whole host of really fabulous neurochemicals in your bloodstream. So you've got oxytocin, serotonin, like they're having a big party in there. You can do this for 30 seconds. You will start to move, because most people are going around in high beta, which is like there's low beta, there's mid-range beta, low beta, high beta. And most folks are going around in high beta, which is like pedal to the metal. I got to get this stuff done. Best way I ever heard those, so they're more brainwave frequencies, but when we talk about beta, alpha, theta, and delta, the best way I ever heard them described was like a 4-gear race car that most people are driving around in first gear. So it's like, I got to get there. I got to get there. I got to get there. And it's like, you have to relax. And so a lot of people will see that, especially quote unquote high performers, a term I somewhat struggle with. We can come back to that if you want, bookmark it. But,
Sure.
But this, like the moment that we were like, so I wanted to see like, what would happen if actually I was way more relaxed? And what happened was I started to open up to this time gap, and discussing a little bit this in the book too, because it's so important for people to start understanding, like there are certain ways and things that you can do to have your, like not have the same 24 hours as everybody else seemingly. It's like you open up to so much more. You're doing less, because the doing is happening through you. It's like the teaching of the Lao Tzu, and the non-doing it is done. So you're sort of in this like non-doing place. And I love giving talks about this, because people like, they hear it and they're like, that's not possible, but actually it's very, very possible. And so yawning is the first one that I recommend. Laying down, just getting horizontal, just for 5 minutes. Again, what our body does what our brain does when we lay down is it associates with like time to go to sleep. So it naturally starts to move into these other frequencies. When you move into these other frequencies, what happens is you also just have a greater capacity for creativity. You have a greater capacity to learn, to retain those learnings. Like if you move into theta, which is possible, if you lay down for 5 minutes, you can start drifting into theta. Your brain's starting to release catecholamines. If you drift into delta, which is also possible, if you for most people that's happening when they sleep, you're releasing human growth hormone. So you're literally youthing in 5 minutes, and then you just get back up and you start over. And there's many possibilities to do this throughout your day. If you build this in, the more you do, the more time opens up to you, and the ability to get through so much more with so much less effort. But it's funny, because lots of times when people be like, oh no, I can't just lay down, that's crazy. And and when they tell me that, I paraphrase from the Dalai Lama, like, if you don't think you have 5 minutes to lay down for an hour.
Yeah.
And if you think you can't meditate for a couple minutes, meditate for an entire hour. Literally, I'm telling you, everything will change. But just laying down, especially for those moms out there, especially for us moms, it's so important to just be like, I'm timing out, and I don't care what anybody has to say about it. I'm timing out, because that's how I'm going to be back with the best and the brightest.
I love 2 practical things. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's also just the practice of opening your mind to it changing, and it can be different. I think even that's a struggle. I know God, Universe, Madonna has checked me because I can go. I'm fit. We can do all the things. We'll go till we're tired, bleeding, whatever. And I like major things will happen. I tore my ACL. I've had adrenal fatigue, like stuff to where it's like, they're like, okay, if you're not going to stop, we're going to stop you. And then things come through, and then you have the breakthrough, and then you understand and you reorganize and you get back on track. But it's hard when you're in it, spinning, to sit there. And it's, even if you have time to lay down, the thought to lay down can be hard, or to yawn. I've read a lot about that, pre-workout to start yawning and stuff. So you can see CrossFitters doing that, like as they're walking onto the floor. It's funny, but I love those practical things, because also we think these massive points of change or pivot have to be grandiose, where it can just be something small that can, change your frequency, change your mind, change your habits. And it's a very small, free thing.
Yeah, it's almost always those small things, actually. And I refer to them as micro investments, or sometimes I say microdose on the small things, because you're going to see some really massive changes over a period. But the problem is most people, they start to feel uncomfortable when they don't see the returns right away. And so really playing with the magic of compound interest. Einstein called it the 8th wonder of the universe. It's like, one of the ways that the example that I'll often give is like, if I give you a penny today and I offer to compound that for a month, or I give you $2.5 million, or euro or yen or whatever your currency is. And most people will go for the 2.5. But if you've hit a month with 29 days, you've gone over the 2.5 mark. If you hit 30 days, you've gone over 5. If you hit 31 days, you've gone over 10 million. So it's like that with these things, but people get disillusioned because they say, oh, I'm okay, day 2, I'm on 2 pennies, 4 pennies, 8 pennies, 16 pennies. Like I got 16 cents. What's the point of this? This sucks. And they just ditch it. But it's really sticking with those micro shifts. It's like anything else. You don't turn a plane around 180. You do micro shifting. The same thing with a huge boat. You can't turn it around. You can't go like this. It just doesn't work. So you've got to, that's part of realizing like, oh, there's these things. But then what happens is it is really a miracle, because all of a sudden you see this massive change and shift. And then you open up to you're playing with bigger amounts. It's just like investing. You're playing with more currency, which currency is flow. That's corrente, comes from that word. So to flow, right? So you're playing around with this and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The converse can also happen when you give up at 16 cents, or 32 cents. You're like, screw this. And that you can start a devolution. So it's really this evolution into more and more of who you are through these practices. And it is important to really microdose them, because it's a little bit like, again, to stay on the financial side of things, it's like Warren Buffett telling us not to test the depths of the water with both feet. Like you don't just jump in to see how deep something is.
Right.
You're going to shock the heck out of your nervous system. So it's like, oh, what would that little thing be? And then you just start to see these massive, massive returns over a while. So it is so important to kind of find out what that is for you and stick with it.
Yeah. Boom. There you go. I like that. My brain, just because I'm the most, all I'm thinking is like, not shock your system, but then there's ice baths. Or what if you were going to die in 15 days, take the 2.5 million. So I'm just here I was that student that was just always the most, but I'm in alignment with you. And this is a perfect segue, because there's this constant conversation of instant gratification. Our young humans are on the phone all the time. Everything is instantaneous all the time. And nothing in your life is worthwhile, or nothing worthwhile is going to happen overnight. Writing a book, winning a championship, having a successful marriage, whatever, nothing happens instantaneously. And everything that's worth something takes time to get to. Do you address in your practice, like, do you customize your conversation, your teachings to different generations, like depending on what room you're speaking in, or does that change at all?
Not so much, but here's what I will tell you is that you can experience both. Like you actually can get to a point with your consciousness where the things are happening immediately.
Okay.
And that's actually the place that I want to bring, when I give talks, I invite people to consider that potential, which is a little bit like when I say, okay, look at sometimes even pictures from me day to day, like they change so much. So here's what I will call on different studies to express this. But, one example is, for example, multiple personality disorder, right? When people change personalities, when they have, and I know it has a different name now, I can't remember what the term is. There's a different terminology for it. But when they change so-called personality, what you'll see is like the instantaneous changes within their physiology, within their physical self, right? You'll see massive changes, sometimes massive weight loss. You'll see massive strength gain. You'll see these things. It's like, these are documented cases of these things happening. I can give an example from my own work. I very rarely work one-on-one. I mean, I do work one-on-one, but I have a 3-year waiting list for my one-on-one work. And I mostly now I'm just focused on the stage and the book. So that's where the bulk of my energy goes. But when I do one-on-one work, right, we'll see lots of these massive transformations. And the closer someone is to that ability to kind of just shift their consciousness, the faster those changes will be. So I had an example of a family, really prominent family actually, that wanted me to work with their daughter. And I normally don't work with young children. She was quite young at the time. I think like when we started working, she was about 8 when we started working together. And normally just avoid that. But I felt compelled for various reasons to work with her. And she had been suffering from terrible eczema. I mean, terrible eczema. And this family had done everything. I mean, they're one of the most resource families in the world, really. So they had done everything. They'd gone everywhere, tried everything, all the topical stuff, all the things. And after one session, her eczema vanished and it never returned of us working together.
Let's unpack that.
It was really just her getting this thing that I'm talking about, like her consciousness, or the consciousness that was that's representing her, or representing all of us really, but it like got it. And so she was able to dial into that potential in a way that it was like that. It was overnight. And I've had occurrences like that. Again, things that I wouldn't believe if they hadn't occurred firsthand with me or with people I've worked with. I would not believe it. I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. What's the wonder drug? And I haven't taken any wonder drugs. I'm like, okay, this is consciousness. So it's like opening up to these potentials that are available to us. But if we are so stuck in like, no, it has to be this way, like it has to be hard work, and that's the only way, that is a way. It is a very linear way, and you will get there. And then if the more you do that and get familiar with it, the more you'll open up to the trust of this process. So the more, the quicker that process can then become potentially. And the more you realize, oh, this works. I know this way works, but there is this other way that I'm talking about, which is kind of this, you literally, there's no room in the consciousness anymore for anything other than the desired outcome or the probability outcome. So literally it's flooded out. All other potentials are flooded out, and there's just the one potential, and that's who you are. And so in that moment, when you start to connect with it, and the more you connect with it, and the less noise you have in the way, which, coming back to your point of this generational phenomena of, we're really in this hyper distraction at the moment, and it transcends generations, but it's the way right now that we're conditioned by a lot of our devices and things like that. You do have to become very intentional about your information intake. And so, especially in this last book, the audiobook just came out too, which I think is great, because it's like tuning into what actually these tiny steps that you can take to start freeing up your attention. I mean, trillions of dollars are spent, not billions, trillions are spent annually to capture that resource, your attention. So start to understand how valuable it is and take it back. And if anything is leading you back into that, then I say, listen to it, engage with it, work with it, because it's reminding you of that truth. And anything that's not, that can be like mindless scrolling or whatever, start to slowly increase the gap of your exposure to that. Now there's a line, and I don't belong to any particular denomination, but I study all traditions. I think they're all fascinating. And there's a line in the Bible from James 1:8, a divided mind is unstable in all its ways. When you start to decrease that level of instability, that sense of like, oh, I got to be all over the place and I got to cover all these things. And you start to start to slow it down, and you start to get to this place of like, oh, actually, what is really deeply calling to me, and start to just feel into it and know that you are that, and start to direct your attention and your conscious awareness to it. That can be very instantaneous, but you do have to learn that. And I think that's the skill. That's the skill more than any other skill. It's not like, the skill is learn how to use this mind, which we can talk more about if you want, and learn how to direct the thought process, learn how to actually make the mind subservient to this intelligence we've been talking about. And then game's over. You're just open up to everything. Yeah.
I love that. Well, yeah. And I like that you point out the difference, I think, as you said, is the intentionality. And I would, in a very basic form, would say you just got to keep showing up. You got to be intentional about what you're doing. If you're kicking it and thinking it's just going to come through no matter what, or it's just going to happen, or mom and dad have, provided this cushy path, I think that is like the Achilles heel, which ultimately not only like, are you not getting what you want, you're not serving your purpose. And your purpose is like what brings this world together, what, your positive impact, your mark, all the things, like it missteps all the stuff that really matters. So there's like a twofold that kind of whoops you. As a student of the game, I want to hear, let's lean into the mind and the space. I've gotten good about it. And I'm even good with like spirit animals or little signs or things that come through. And I would consider myself connected. I don't know that I can clearly consider myself like intuitive, but I'm very like, I feel things, I see things. Would you consider yourself intuitive?
I think we all are. I think it's a really more of a question of how connected you are again to this intelligence. So I keep coming back to the same thing, but it's like when we talk about that in intuition, and intuition has been studied there's a lot of fascinating theories on intuition and where it comes from. But the way I see it is, the stiller you are and the more sort of like your ability to kind of calm the noise and quiet the noise that we've been talking about increases your capacity to be aware of a lot of things that maybe most folks aren't aware of, but we all have this capacity. It's a question of how developed it is. And, but yeah, to go back to the mind too, I think it's really part of quieting that, part of really connecting or grooving with this intelligence is the ability to start thinking. People, I find it amusing that we say, I think, because it's somewhat the equivalent of saying I beat my heart. It is for most of us. It really is. For most of us, it really is, because we're not trained to consciously direct the thought process. One of the most sold books of all time is Think and Grow Rich. And I used to wonder, like, if so many people are reading this book and they're not getting rich, what are they missing? I'm like, what's missing here? And the message came through that there are 2 words implicit in that title. And if you don't get those words, then you kind of won't really get the teachings or be able to apply the teachings. And the 2 words are learn to. Learn to think. It's funny, even when we talk about thoughts, right? Thoughts, as many advancements as there have been in neuroscience, and as much as we do know, we still don't know the origin of a thought. Right. Like, there's not a part of your brain that I can point to, like the prefrontal cortex, and say thought originates there. We don't know. So it's pretty fascinating phenomena. A thought is an electrical impulse. We do know that. And we do know that the average person is having somewhere between 50 to 70,000 thought impulses a day, or electrical impulses that are running through them. And the curious thing is, for most people, those are the same thought impulses every day. So you can't die to be reborn, because there's like this whole thought loop happening, and an attachment to certain thoughts. And the attachment goes both ways. It's like, oh my God, I really, really like this, so let me hold on to it. Or, oh my God, I really, really, really don't like this, so I'm going to hold on to that. Like, it happens all the ways. Instead, when you start to you start to learn how to direct them, and then you let all of that directing go too, so that you can be used. But again, there are different sort of phases, as far as I can tell from my own experience. There are different phases of this, but learning to think, learning to consciously direct the thought process is one of the most powerful things we can do. And it is also one of the most arduous undertakings that exist. So most people will go to any other thing. They will do any other thing to avoid trying to direct their thought processes. And they'll hold on to things and be like, I just can't stop thinking about that. Well, that's an untrained mind. And that's okay. But if you care about the direction that things are going in, and you want to be able to affect that, and then you will let go of that. The beautiful thing is, you will let go of trying to control that altogether too at some point. But it's first learning that mastery, because that mastery is what moves the mind. And I think it was Einstein who talked about this, but maybe it was someone else, but this idea that the mind is a terrible master and a wonderful servant. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, when you've actually learned how to make the mind subservient to this intelligence, what happens is then you have that kind of mastery, at least to a certain degree, and you start opening up to the ways that it wants to follow the intelligence. So it's very fascinating stuff. Really kind of really a lot of dedication involved, but when you do it, you will start to see incredibly profound changes in your life. Yeah.
And that's where I think that hard isn't the right word, but you have to be committed to anything I think you want to see quote unquote success in. And whether that's showing up or letting go or whatever it is, just the easy, like, I'm going to Google it and get the answer and I'm going to feel better. Mindset isn't going to, isn't going to be the actual answer. It might lead you down the right path. And that's the upside, is they might be able to find you in your book and what's going on, or this conversation, but you still have to have that intentionality. And I love the disconnect and the connect between the mind and then the brain, because there's science and then there's energy and then there's just belief. And I like science and whatnot, but I'm also okay with believing. I don't need to know where a thought comes from. I definitely understand why, in academia, and we can break it down and get into it, but I'm kind of like, I'm just kind of okay with being like, it's here. I trust, I know at points I need to disrupt, at other points I need to lean in. And that's a very fluid process. But I think sometimes we can get too much into the minutia. We're like, just trust your body, like just trust what you're feeling. And I also kind of liked how you connected your mind and your body. If you're holding on to this energy or this thought, like an untrained mind, that can also show up like in your liver or in your heart or in other like physical manifestations from this stress or whatnot, which often comes from like our thoughts or a narrative or whatever we're clinging on to. Do you want to unpack that at all?
Well, that piece is really, really important, because what's happening is, when you're especially getting kind of stuck on some of these thought impulses, these electrical impulses, what happens, and we've seen this in brain body scans, it's really fascinating, because the brain body scans, modern day brain body scans are catching up to what the Eastern traditions have been teaching for millennia. They knew we had these chakras, these energy centers. They knew energy was getting stuck in them. They knew this was getting in the way of this intelligence flowing through us. They knew all that. And they talked about it in various different ways, the teachers and masters of those traditions. And now the Western science is really caught up in brain body scans. So you can see that when there's this electrical impulse, there's the clinging to it, there's an actual sensation, there's an actual neuropeptide or a chemical messenger that's then released from the brain into the body, into the various organs of the body that literally get these neuropeptides get lodged in these organs. So again, lots of times we say something is psychological or it's in your mind, and it's really that stuck stagnant energy that we referenced, I don't know, about 20 minutes ago in this conversation. And so it's also like understanding, okay, how do I start letting that go? And that was a massively big, that opened me so much when I started learning how to let go of the stuck energy in my body. Because again, it's not all happening on the level of the mind. It's like literally getting stuck there in the body. So the liberation of that energy is so important in whatever means you have for that. I love, and I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but it might be important to share, is one of the exercises I learned when I was learning about liberating this energy was a practice called shaking. And there's this woman who founded a movement called Koya. And the way she introduced this practice called shaking was, she said, imagine a gazelle being chased through the wetlands by a tiger. However, the gazelle gets away. The gazelle does not go to therapy then for the next 10 years about this time that this tiger was chasing her. What the gazelle does is she shakes through every part of her body, releasing the tension, releasing the fear, and goes back to being a gazelle. Shaking is also one I'll use with like high athlete or elite athletes or anything else. It's like, we've got to shake it out. We've got a lot of like tension built up around the muscles, around the tissues, around the organs. And we have to liberate that energy to be at the highest potential that's available to us in any given moment. Like, that's going to change. The more energy that's liberated, the more is available for you to then direct toward a probability outcome or a potential. So that piece of understanding the connection of that and the liberation, therefore, as a result, is wow. It's important stuff. It's good stuff.
Well, if you see it in nature, here's again my thing. Like, I'm here for the academics and what to a point, but also if you can see videos of this on YouTube of gazelles shaking, and like you see some of these practices in nature, and Eastern medicine and practices are way ahead of where we are in America. But it's really cool when you already see this thing that nature has provided, because of course the gazelle's not going to therapy. Although in health and wellness, as a professional in this space, everything can be made, and there's always a way to make money off of everything. I pretty much
get the gazelle in.
Get the gazelle. Yes, I bring in a bunch of gazelles and you just shake like that. I would not be surprised. That being said, you need to be a conscious consumer and connected to your own pieces. Point being, all science and everything here, you see it in nature. Like, sometimes the answer is, like you said, the simple little stuff is right in front of us, and you don't need to overthink it. Like, just do these little tools and see what's around you. I do, I always have a million more questions, but I do want to intentionally unpack, give yourself permission, be confident, be happy, be you, master the habits to transform your life, your personal development, confidence, self. I know we've touched on all these things, but is there anything specific in the book that you want to share that you think is like, the thing that will pull the people in the most to go get this and really dig into the deep with it?
Well, I love the fact that you talked about simplicity a moment ago. And that's what I constantly get back as feedback around this book is like, oh God, it's so accessible. People will tell me, I've been trying to read books like this for so long, and this one I just flew through, whether it's the first one, Change Starts Within You, up until this last one. And what I love about that, so Da Vinci has been known to have said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Like, what I think is, if someone can't explain it to you simply in terms of how they've approached it, then it's not much use. So one of the things I love about the teachings that are there and everything is I really, really wanted to make this accessible, whether it was explaining the science behind it, whether it was explaining the spirit behind it, whether it was explaining the screw all that non-approach behind all of it. Like, I wanted all of that to be accessible so people could start experimenting with this potential of change. And Give Yourself Permission came as a kind of a download. I think it was mostly because I had seen so many, giving talks to thousands of people around the world and all the things, I'd seen so many people kind of in a crisis of confidence. And I really wanted to unpack that. Also, with the first book, I was really on about confidence, because that word confidence, it comes from confidere, which means with trust or with reliance. And so this self-actualization comes through the self-reliance. It comes from a trusting. It comes from what, this original equipment we have. Like when you talked a moment ago about seeing this in nature, we have these built-in technologies. They're the simplest things ever, but we were taught not to shake. We were taught to sit still. We were taught to not move. We were taught to not yawn because it was considered rude, or you don't care, or you're bored. It's like, no, that's a built-in technology that this intelligence has given you to reset. So I wanted people to really understand that. And the book is just a series of those that I have found for myself. But again, it's a pointing back to you. And I think that's the most important thing. And I want to go back to that because I don't know, the other day I was prepping for an interview, and one of the insights that came through me is I had just gotten back from a hike. And one of the things that came through was like, imagine someone coming up to you in the woods and just running up to you and saying, do you know where my car is? You would look at that person like they were freaking, crazy, right? Because like, how the heck am I supposed to know where your car is? But that's what we're doing, right? We run around and, do you know where my heart is? Do you know where my intuition is? Like, do you know how I can find that? Now, here's the thing. If someone has kind of been seasoned in those woods, and someone has found the way, they know where their car is and they know some of the paths, they can kind of indicate some of those. You're still the one who's got to find your way back to your own knowing and your own inner intelligence. But what you're looking for are those resources that remind you of that, and you will recognize them because they show up as this. You will feel it in every cell. You'll be like, oh my God, I'm so energized. What was this? What was that? That's you. That's not to that. And so these books are very intentionally designed for you. Like when you connect with something, as I was saying earlier, you really know it. You will feel that. You will feel it dancing in your cells, and you'll be like, what was that? That is you. That is you. And that is the deeper you calling for this magnificent change in expression that can continue throughout this entire existence in the physical plane, if you allow it.
And we are jumping back in. We will begin to close out because I know we can go on and on. The one point I really wanted to connect on, I think a lot of our listeners will connect to the details and the philosophers and the science and all the things. But if that isn't your space, I really liked how you leaned heavy into the downloads, things coming through, like trust what's going on. Turmeric and tequila is just that. At one point in time, I literally just paused and wrote down to inspire positive, radical social evolution. I had no idea what that meant. The podcast has reversed, was the answer. And I thought it was funny when you're like, it's got to be simple. As a marketing branding professional, I completely agree. And turmeric and tequila was just me. It was there. And then I merged that with to inspire positive, radical social evolution. So I'm like, what the fuck does this mean? How do I make this work? And so I've had to make it weave and wind. But the downloads, I think, are some of the biggest intel we can lean into. Is there any point of that you want to like share, or how that impacted your world or your journey?
Absolutely. Again, it's that intelligence, right? And the way it's wanting to inform you, right? And so that is the biggest piece of all. It really is. And it's learning how to shut out all the other noise that we were talking about as much as possible, so that you can really be in communion with it, and it can source the answers through you, because that's what happens. And again, that goes back to that teaching of like, in the non-doing, it is done, right? You start to, the doing happens through you as a result of who you are. It's a very, very different way of moving through the world.
There you go. It's so hard. It's a continued practice. But Cortney's amazing. Please go check her out. Will you hit us with links? Where do we get the book? Any piece of intel you want to share to connect with our community?
Yeah, you are amazing. Your community is amazing. I'm so excited to be here. So my name is Cortney, spelled without a U, without the letter U. So that is important. Cortney. So the short URL is Cort Inc., like Court Incorporated. Cortinc. And so that's kind of the main website. You can get a free mini meditation that, again, works with this confidence that we were talking about, and just boosts a lot of things in you, which is really nice. And then the books are available pretty much everywhere where books are sold. So everywhere online, a lot of brick and mortar. The audiobook for Give Yourself Permission just came out. So that's really exciting. I wanted it to be my voice, and the publishers were like, we need it within the next 3 months, which coincided to when I was moving from Italy to the US. So it was really crazy times, but I got in the studio every day, recorded for this book and the first book. And so the first books can be available on audio at the beginning of the year. And this book, Give Yourself Permission, is available now. So that's everywhere. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn and a little bit on Facebook, but it's Cortney McDermott. So Cortney, Cortney McDermott. And so, yeah, definitely connect with me. I love hearing people's stories. It's so exciting when people tell me the ways that they've been affected by this work and what's changed and shifted in them. Really love that. I try to stay on top as much as I can. I ask my team to send me all the really cool ones, which they do. So yeah, I'd love to connect.
There you go. Final question I ask everyone, my most favorite part of the show. Well, top 5. What is success to you?
Ooh, success is trust.
Hey.
It's that trust we've been talking about. It's really like, I trust everything that's happening, every single thing, even the stuff that's hard. Yeah. That's success.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I love it. Way to back up your point about simplicity and just nail it with example right there. All the things right there. I love it so much. I want to give a quick thank you to our sponsors. Thank you, Lux Neuro, Neurofeedback and Counseling. Lux Neuro wants to meet you if you're ready to transform your life. Visit them at luxneuro.com. Schedule a consultation. Declan James Watches, you know them. That's my fitness family. Local veteran owned. Colorado Clownfish Swim School, swim lessons and water safety training for all ages. We believe in life skills through sports. So come waterproof your family today. All the things. Go check out. Cortney is a wealth of knowledge, and you cite some incredible humans and philosophical things, but I actually really appreciate your view and your breakdown even more. So keep sharing the good word, keep sharing the gospel. Go check out her book. I dug into the socials today. You got lots of good stuff, and you're on the move. You're walking and you're talking it. So I'm inspired. And we'll hopefully catch up again soon. If you listen to podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts, this video will also be on YouTube. So go check that out and join us for another conversation. Hopefully soon. Thank you so much, Cortney. And like I said, hopefully we'll reconnect.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Tune in next time, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.